some of these upcoming Marvel Snap cards look absolutely crazy strong. We got the latest datamined cards here with the patch that just hit, and these are going to be cards landing in the July season. As always with these early looks, these are not necessarily the final versions of cards. Sometimes numbers get tweaked even pretty substantially before they're released, but often these designs can give us at least some insights into what's planned. And of course, we've seen some busted looking cards released as is as well. So some of these might actually make it into the game as is. So we're going to talk about each of these and then rank them from best to worst, kicking things off here with Gwenpool. And of course, I have no idea who Gwenpool is, but I'm going to say she's Deadpool's daughter. I know that's not right, but we'll have some nice people in the comments come along and educate us on the lore here for Gwenpool. I do know that she's a 4/4 and she looks absolutely busted with this effect. It's an on reveal. Pick a random card in your hand 4 times, give +2 power each time. So in total, she's giving +8 in buffs to your hand. That's basically going to be randomly distributed across your hand in increments of 2. So that could hit like 4 different cards. It could actually hit 1 card 4 times in a row. Of course, you could actually force that if you isolated your hand down to a single card. But, you know, just a mix of these various +2 buffs, which when you're talking about +8 power, that effectively makes Gwenpool a 4/12 if you're able to put all of those cards into play. And as we know, a 4/12 is a fantastic stat line. Like, that's way above rate for a 4-drop. The risk, of course, is that some of that stuff may get stuck in hand. Like, you don't have an opportunity to play it. You run out of energy. You know, if you have like a good 5 and a 6, you want to play on curve, and you know this hits a 3-drop or something, there may just not be any space to put that 3-drop into play. Something might effectively get stuck. But of course, you can construct your deck in a way to try to avoid that, making sure you have flexible energy costs, maybe even stuff to dump your hand early, so you're hitting, you know, key targets that are left behind. So I think you know, very often you will expect to be putting at least +4, +6 into play, and I actually think usually you'll be putting +8 into play as a bonus for this Gwenpool, which makes her total stat output here just incredibly effective for a 4-cost card. Now, of course, on top of that, the real upside for this card is the additional potential stat scaling this can offer, because we have various cards in Marvel Snap that love getting bonus stats and do something extra with those bonus stats. Classic example is Sebastian Shaw. He's literally just going to double these buffs every single time he gets hit. So imagine isolating a Sebastian Shaw in hand, hitting it with Gwenpool 4 times. That is going to be +16 on your Sebastian Shaw, which of course is absolutely silly when that combo hits. And we've seen like surfer buff decks that utilize, you know, numerous cards already. You've got the Sebastian Shaw and the Brood, and you know, hitting this with a Brood is nuts. So I think you could actually weave this into a Silver Surfer deck, filling that kind of 4-cost awkward spot in mini Surfer decks. They usually kind of don't have a lot to do on 4. That's very sensible, often just like float in energy playing a 3-drop. Maybe Gwen slots in. You have a few cards that benefit from that extra stat scaling, and you're just off to the races with this one. And it doesn't stop there, right? You've got so many other cards that care about stats. You've got like Beta Ray Bill doubles your stats. You got Deadpool, of course. I don't know if this would work too well in the Deadpool deck. Might be hard to fit all that in or isolate the Deadpool, but yeah, possibility anyway. You've got like Black Panther that loves doubling your stats. So there are so many different decks that I think you could actually put Gwenpool into, and she could find some really nice synergy. So you have like Silver Surfer, you have Deadpool, you have the Asgard core with Beta Ray Bill, you have like Black Panther on reveal, and of course she's got on reveal synergies as well. So there's like extra stuff with Wongs and Absorbing Mans and so on that can stack this up for even additional bonuses. And here's the crazy thing, I don't even know if this needs like specific synergies. I think it's a 4/12 in so many different decks. If you're running like just a dump deck where you're trying to get a bunch of cards into play late, like Gwenpool on 4, play a bunch of buffed 1-drops, right? It's just a bunch of extra surprise stats at the end of the game. So I basically think this car has a really high floor. Like, I don't think you have to do anything crazy to make this good, because it's just putting out so many big numbers. And then I think it has crazy high upside as well. Of course, that scaling that's possible off all these like stat doubling cards is absolutely nuts too. So can be played in a lot of decks, is just a good card, and can be played in a lot more decks even as a potential crazy high synergy card, which to me, when the floor is high and the ceiling is high, you've got a recipe for absolute success. I think Gwenpool looks like a crazy strong card as it stands. I think this is one we could see a lot in a variety of different homes. So this card's pretty cool. Cassandra Nova. She is a new 3/1. I'm gonna say, like, as a joke, that this is Professor X's daughter, but I think that might actually be right. I said it's Deadpool's daughter. This is a bald lady. Looks like Professor X's daughter. So that's my guess. Again, lore experts, please educate us. She has an honor revealer that introduces a new word we haven't seen in Marvel Snap yet. Drain 1 power from each card in your opponent's deck. So drain here to me is definitely different than just afflict, or it would just say afflict the cards in your opponent's deck with -1 power. So she's not only going to debuff the cards in deck, she's also going to gain those stats as I read this. So if you play this on turn 3 in a normal game, your opponent will still have 6 cards in deck at that stage. They'll have drawn through their first 6, have 6 remaining, which means Cassandra Nova will debuff all of those 6 remaining cards and gain 6 power herself, making her a 3/7 on turn 3, which that's already great. We play Gladiator with this like crazy upside risk as a 3/8, and Cassandra Nova has this just extra bonus benefit of debuffing their deck while also still having really high stats. So as a 3-drop on curve, absolutely nuts card. Now the downside, of course, of this card, the risk here is that as you get later and later into a game, she does get smaller and smaller, because, you know, we said she gains 6 on turn 3. Well, by the time you get around to turn 6, your opponent has drawn 3 additional cards, only have 3 left in deck. On turn 6 in an organic game, this might only be a 3/4. And of course, any other kind of card draw stuff could limit this even more. Now, of course, there are ways to manipulate the number of cards in your opponent's deck. If you play rocks, we got Korg and Rockslide, for instance, you can add stuff into that deck so that Cassandra has extra bodies to pull from. So this has a natural sort of synergy with Darkhawk decks. You know, this could be another threat basically in a Darkhawk kind of package. And yes, she should still be able to steal power from rocks. They would just go to -1 in that case instead of 0. Now, when it comes to the actual afflictions and how much that impacts your opponent, it's not likely to be super impactful, because, you know, even if you play this on turn 3, they're probably only drawing 3 debuffed cards. The odds of them playing all 3 of those cards aren't particularly high necessarily, but it could represent some additional bonuses to extract out of Cassandra. So, you know, in theory, she's a 3/7 that also, you know, debuffed 3 things. That kind of makes her a net 3/10 if things work out perfectly. I'd say more often than not, though, they're probably just gonna be like 1 or 2 at max, but still, that's just adding to her net total stat output. Now, interestingly, this also exists as a bit of a tech card of sorts against any decks that are adding extra cards to their deck. So we have the classic example of Thanos. You know, you're shuffling some extra stones into your deck at the start of the game. Much like that's a benefit to Darkhawk, that's going to be a benefit to Cassandra Nova. So this could be another way to punish those sorts of decks. We also saw Erishim revealed in a previous leaked card video, and he shuffled 12 extra cards into your deck. So Cassandra Nova could be absolutely bonkers big against any sort of Erishim deck. So this could be like a soft counter of sorts to decks like that are shuffling extra things in. And then there is, you know, technically maybe sort of a bonus with sort of affliction decks. This is technically afflicting things, but like we said before, it takes them a while to draw into those afflictions from Cassandra. I don't think, you know, like this is going to significantly discount your Abomination or anything of the sort, although we will see one additional card that could benefit from these afflictions even when played earlier in the game if they play one of those later. So that is another side angle for this. I don't think will be common or a particularly big bonus for this one. I think just traditional lines, Darkhawk stuff, Silver Surfer stuff, playing this on curve are both going to be great options for Cassandra Nova. Frankly, just any deck that needs a good 3, this could present as one of those really nice high tempo 3-drop sorts of lines. So let's go ahead and talk about that affliction synergy guy I mentioned. This is Ajax, and I don't know what his deal is, but he kind of reminds me of that dude Avalanche, that Marvel character we haven't seen yet. So I'm going to say this is Avalanche's dad. It's everybody's father and child. Ajax here is a 4/4 with ongoing +1 power for each card in play afflicted with negative power. So we have a sort of affliction synergy piece payoff sort of card. I mean, we've all seen those like hazmat boards where you're just hitting your opponent's stuff across the board. They've got 12 cards in play. Hazmat hits everything. And Ajax gains a chill plus 12 because of the hazmat. Like, that's actually kind of nuts, right? That becomes a 416. Even more mediocre, like meager boards that are like just, 8 things for a hazmat to hit. He's still a 412. It doesn't take a lot to get this into those crazy stat lines. Now, of course, you can actually also hit your own stuff for afflictions. Like if you hazmat your own board, he could get even bigger because this doesn't say enemy cards in play. It's both. Usually those decks do run Luke Cage to sort of mitigate the downsides, but there might be some weird world where you're happy to afflict yourself and you just run like big tall stuff that synergizes. So Ajax into a Mystique into like hazmat spam could be a thing, and then just like Ajax and Mystique gets so big that they just carry 2 lanes and it doesn't matter if all of your stuff is small. There's also things like maybe Typhoid Mary that could go in there as just another tall threat. So you could almost see a self, or I guess like symmetrical affliction deck as opposed to the sort of one-sided affliction deck we typically see. But you could also do the common like high evo stuff as well. Just toss this into a high evo deck, let your Wasp and Cyclops and so on do the work to get Ajax up to like 4-7, 4-8, sometimes even higher, and then you've still got complementary pieces like Abomination and all the high evo package to still do a bunch of work. And again, this is one where the numbers can potentially get so big. I think this could carve out its own kind of archetypes. I really like that idea of like Ajax, Mystique, hazmat everything. Just like throw out rocks, clog up everybody, just, go negative 23 power or whatever with a hazmat, and your Ajax and Mystique are just completely insane. So I actually think this card has a lot of potential. Affliction seems to be something they're building into more and more and more. And this does feel like a really nice, rewarding sort of crown on top of that package. So next up here is Copycat, and she is definitely Mystique's daughter. I swear I didn't plan this gag. That is clearly Mystique's daughter. She's blue, she's transforming, and that actually might be legit. I don't know. But Copycat's a 3/5, and she reads, when you draw this, steal the text from the bottom card of your opponent's deck. Now, note a couple things. That does say steal the text, not copy the text. So you are removing it from that card, and it is the bottom card. So, in theory, in most games, they wouldn't draw their bottom card anyway, so they're not necessarily particularly miffed that you've stolen the text. They were unlikely to see that card anyway, but there are definitely instances where you can draw through an entire deck with the help of locations and so on. Not to mention, you do shuffle decks as well when you put stuff like rocks into your opponent's deck, so you could steal a text, shuffle up their deck, and then they actually draw that card at the top of their deck because you've shuffled it around, right? And then they have just a completely dead card in hand. That's not really the kind of key element of this card, though. Whether or not they don't get their nice effect is not really what I think is relevant. What's really important for this card is that you can get a nice bonus effect on a card with a great base stat line. This is a 3/5, which I think often feel really good to play. Outside of even Surfer, sometimes you can just weave these in as tempo plays. That's occasionally going to hit like an Iron Man, and you've got a 3/5 Iron Man, right? Or just some solid on reveal. It doesn't even have to be anything crazy. Any little additional bonus upside is nice. I mean, think about sometimes like Baron Zemo right now. He nicely does give you extra stats when he pulls that body, but sometimes just getting an on reveal effect or something off Baron Zemo, the card that you summon, can be really cool, and Copycat can do the same sort of thing with the same kind of base body. Now, of course, you won't always high roll into Iron Man or whatever. Sometimes it could be like a destroy card or something that's a little bit harder to play. But the important thing is this is not happening on reveal. It's happening when you draw this. You're going to know what it is in hand. Like if it turns into a Carnage or whatever and you don't want to risk playing a Carnage, you don't have to, right? Like, okay, I don't have anywhere to play this. I'll just sit on this game. I low rolled, but other times you're going to know, oh my God, this is insane. I'm going to be able to do some silliness. And now I don't know if it'll be revealed to the opponent what this copies. I think it won't because it's in hand. It's not like visible on board or anything. I know like Red Hulk triggers, but that's because it's kind of based on the opponent's actions and they want to give you that information so that you can affect your play based on the Red Hulk. I don't know that Copycat would afford that same luxury. So this might be a little bit of a surprise to the opponent. If it does show the opponent which card they've lost or which card you've copied or gained, that does hurt Copycat a little bit, of course, because they're going to know what to expect, and they're also going to know what's on the bottom of their deck, which is one additional thing we haven't talked about with Copycat yet. Even if this effect is bad, even if you can't play your Copycat for whatever reason, just the fact that it exists is giving you reconnaissance value. You're going to know which card is at the bottom of your opponent's deck and which card they are very unlikely to see in a given game. And that could be their win condition. That could be their big Hella or whatever. It's like, oh, dude, their Hella's at the bottom. They're not going to have their Hella win condition. Might afford you some sort of snap equity. If you see, hey, I'm going to have a go at this game because they don't have Hella, I know we're going to win, I'm going to snap on 3, especially if the opponent doesn't see the Copycat effect revealing. Now, the opponent is shown what Copycat steals. You may not have, as much snap equity, but I think it could still help you win some games. You're going to have that nice information in your back pocket and just that bonus effect. So yes, Hello may not be particularly helpful for your deck, but still knowing it's not available to them really changes your lines and your game plan a lot. So ultimately, I think this card's pretty cool, man. If it didn't have a great solid base stat line, I would have a hard argument for the utility of this in some cases, because I think there's some low rolls alongside some high rolls. But the fact that it gives you the sort of agency over the decision of playing it or not, the fact that it gives you recon and information, and the fact that it has a solid base stat line, I think makes this actually a fairly low risk sort of line that has actually some really high upside as well. So for me, Copycat looks really good once again. All right, and our final card here is Hydra Bob, and this is definitely Red Skull's son, I think. He's a 2/5. After each turn, move to another location if you're losing here. So this card's pretty cool. It's kind of like a Silk and a Captain Marvel had a baby, but it doesn't really do exactly what either of those do, so hear me out. It's a 2/5, so we know that's a really good stat line. 2/5s feel great to play, I think. So many tempo decks will love that. In particular, we already have tempo move packages where you're happy to have things bouncing around, buffing your Craven, creating space on your Angela. Hydra Bob could definitely fulfill that to some level. Maybe not quite as interesting with Angela. That's often a location you're going to be ahead, and if you're ahead, he's not moving. He's only moving if you're losing, so maybe some limits there, but ultimately just a great turn 2 play that offers you this kind of luxury. Occasional move synergies, yes, we'll still occasionally buff Craven and stuff, that's cool, but just in any other deck in any other game, if you've lost a location, Hydra Bob's gonna say, okay, I'm gonna give you a shot to maybe be useful in one of the other 2 spots. And that's why we say he's kind of got a Captain Marvel thing. He's just not smart about it. Captain Marvel moves in a way that's smart, but Hydra Bob is smart about whether or not he's gonna move. He's just not smart about where he goes. So he might go to a location you've already like really sufficiently won and kind of waste his power because you were already ahead so much, as opposed to going to a location where you're down 4 and you really desperately need 5 power, right? But I think there are ways to kind of nudge him along, because if you play enough cards, I could fill up a location with 4 cards, really win that one, and then Bob becomes this kind of insurance. Like, okay, if he's left, if I got enough to win left, he stays put. Great, he contributed 5. That gave me the edge I needed. But if we can't win left, if the opponent decides to play left, they drop a big red Hulk there and we're losing left, the Bob's going to say, oh man, I'm losing here. I'm going to shift over to right. And that could give you the boost you need to actually flip right to your favor, as long as you kind of nudge him. So like Professor X, anything that fills up locations could be a way to give Hydra Bob that smartness back. Still not really smart, but forcing him anyway to make some pretty cool lines and give you some game winning outs. So this is, again, one of those effects that probably wouldn't be worth it if his stats sucked, but his stats are fantastic. A 2/5 just feels really good to play. And there aren't necessarily a lot of risks with Bob because this conditionality is like baked into your favor. He never like actively hurts you. I mean, I guess minus your opponent having a Craven or something where he's buffing that. but he never really actively hurts you. He can only ever like do nothing and kind of move to where, you know, if you're losing there and he moves into a losing spot, you were losing anyway, so it didn't really hurt you. Or alternatively, moves into a spot that now flips and you're now winning in that location. It's all upside basically on his effect, which seems like a nice little soft insurance policy of sorts that's just on a card that's already a great stat line. Now, you know, there is still that Craven movement stuff as well. This could occasionally open up a Craven buff, a Miles Morales discount, etc. You know, we have a few ways to benefit movement effects, and I suspect there will still be more of those in the future. So that's I don't even think you necessarily need to play Bob in that deck, but he might be a small bonus. I think this just gets played in every other kind of deck, like any deck that just needs good tempo too. Sometimes we see Silk in that slot already. We see Lizard in that slot sometimes. We see Maximus sometimes in that slot. Sometimes you got to play Maximus. You're like, oh, I don't really want to give them cards. I think you just run Hydra Bob. You take the 1 power hit for a much better effect than Maximus, because that's a downside unless you're running, you know, Ronin or whatever. So to me, this is like just a great, you know, high utility and high output 2-drop that a lot of decks are going to find excuses to play. And I realize now all of these cards look insane to me. I literally think all of these are so good. You know, one other thing I was thinking about with Bob is, like, I was mostly talking about his sort of end of game utility, which really is the focus for me, but there's also some priority management stuff happening here early as well, because it's like if you're really playing for priority early with Hydra Bob, you know, sometimes you commit a card to get priority and it's like, oh shoot, they you know, they matched it, or they exceeded, I didn't gain the priority I wanted. Well, Bob gives you a second shot at priority, much like he would give you a second shot at winning a game, because it's like, oh man, they played their 2-drop or whatever to match my Bob. I didn't gain priority in that location. They've got it in this other spot instead with a like 2-point lead or whatever. Bob has a chance to move into that spot and actually try to gain you priority back, which could be pretty cool. We've seen stuff like that kind of Sandman priority deck we played. Something like Bob could fit really well in that, where you're just trying to gain priority into that final turn and use a card like Bob to make sure that you're kind of filling in the gaps and getting extra chances. Again, it's not guaranteed. You could go into the wrong spot where you already had you know, priority advantage, but might give you a little 50-50 sometimes to grab priority back, which, you know, I don't know how that's going to actually shake out in games. I have to think about that a lot more to see like what kind of impact that has, but could be another little interesting use case or bonus for this card. All right, so now we're going to rank these from best to worst, but honestly, I think they all just look really good. My number 1 card is Gwenpool. My number 2 card is Cassandra Nova. My number 3 card is Hydra Bob. My number 4 card is Ajax. And my number 5 card is Copycat, but I actually think she's still really good. That doesn't mean anything. It's honestly a downside. She looks sick to me. So there you go, folks. That's it for the July cards. I think some of these are going to have their numbers tweaked. They all look really pushed to me, like just good base stat lines, crazy high upsides. I mean, stuff like Ajax is pretty situational. That might stick, you know. He needs a lot of support and help, but some of these just seem like generally too good, then also have bonus effects and synergies that really push them into the next level. So anyway, curious to hear what you think about these cards. Which ones do you like best? That's old Hearthstone patch notes, ignore that. But here's our beautiful Marvel Snap card. So yeah, curious to hear your thoughts. Thanks as always for watching, and until next time, game on.